Welcome to the Hope for the Animals podcast, sponsored by Compassionate Living. I'm your host, Hope Bohannic, and you can find all our archived episodes at our website, hopefortheanimalspodcast.org. And you can also find us on Facebook and Instagram. So we have a very special guest today. Dr. Krista Hiddema of For the Greater Good is going to help us to dig into a really interesting topic, the philosophy and subsequent practice of something called effective altruism, or EA, and how it is permeating the animal advocacy movement. Now, if you're new to animal rights or new to veganism or just exploring these things, this might not be the best place to start. I would recommend going back to any of the last 4 episodes, episode 72, 73, 74, or 75. Those would be a better introduction to this podcast and to veganism. I don't like and usually won't criticize strategies and tactics in the movement. I'm a believer that we need a broad portfolio, a wide variety of approaches to do this work, to get us to animal liberation, even if I'm uncomfortable with some of them. And so does Krista. She feels that way too. And that's part of the problem of EA, and that its followers are very siloed and believe it is the only effective strategy for animals. We're going to get into all that, but I just don't like to do too much internal movement stuff here on the podcast. But I feel that this is such a critical issue and we need to be talking about it, because I am concerned that we are careening down a very bad path as a movement. And I'm so grateful to Krista for speaking out about this. So we're just going to jump right into the interview now, because there is so much to cover and Krista had so much amazing information to share. So let's go right into our conversation. All right, I would like to welcome now our guest. Today we have Krista Hiddema, and she is the executive director of For the Greater Good, where she consults with animal protection organizations on matters of organizational development, strategic planning, and board governance. Krista holds a doctorate in social sciences, where her research focused on the need to utilize ecofeminist principles in matters of board governance within animal rights. And she holds 5 other degrees in areas of leadership, human resources, organizational development. She teaches strategic planning and board governance. She is a fellow with the Animals and Society Research Initiative, a reviewer for the Journal of Critical Animal Studies, and so much more. She resides outside of Toronto, Canada. Welcome to the podcast, Krista.
Hope, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for such a lovely introduction.
Yeah, well, it's amazing all you've done. Your bio is extensive, and I'm really, really impressed with what you have to offer and excited to talk to you.
Thank you. I am super excited to be here, Hope.
Well, we like to start with your vegan origin story. So let us know when and why you went vegan.
Oh my gosh, I would love to share that story. Thank you for asking. So I think, like so many folks, Hope, I grew up in a very traditional meat and potatoes home.
Mm-hmm.
In my particular case, my parents immigrated from the Netherlands, so we're Dutch. And I come from a very long line of dairy farmers. My father was a dairy farmer. My father's father was a dairy farmer, and so on and so on. So we grew up that was very normal. Not only that, but my mother's twin sister, her and her husband were dairy farmers. And I spent my early years as a little girl going out to the farm, having the calves suck on my fingers, that really, really desperation suck that they engaged in. And when I was 5 and 6 and 7, I thought that was really cool. I didn't understand that what they were looking for was, of course, their mothers. So I went through my teenage years, earlier, of course, just eating meat and dairy literally for every single meal. Eventually, I went to a first-year university. I went to a university called Western Ontario in London, Ontario. And in those days, of course, it was the mid 80s. We didn't have the internet. There was no such thing as Kindle. We actually bought books at used bookstores back in those days. So I was meandering around at a used bookstore, and, Hope, I've always struggled with my weight. It's been sort of one of those lifelong struggles for me. And I remember picking up a book called Diet for a New America. And I thought it was a diet book. I was like, great, I'm going to lose 10 pounds. Yay.
Funny.
Well, needless to say, for any of your listeners that know Diet for a New America, it was written by John Robbins. And John Robbins was born as the heir to the Baskin and Robbins fortune. He had the opportunity to live a life of privilege and leisure, and he elected to walk away from that, understanding how very, very detrimental dairy is. And he went on another path, a vegan path, of course. And that book ended up being about animal agriculture. Of course, all forms of animal agriculture are intensive animal agriculture. Yes. So one chapter was about cows, and one chapter was about chickens, et cetera, et cetera. And that book certainly changed my life. It definitely was the seminal moment of changing my life, to understand what animals endure. And although I spent many years after that in the for-profit sector, I eventually joined the animal rights movement in 2012. So that was sort of my journey. And I look back on those days and am eternally grateful for accidentally picking up a diet book.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Well, that book, of course, was just our vegan Bible. It was really the only one of the only publications on veganism, on really animal rights veganism at the time. And it's interesting that I'm sure you could really relate, being from a dairy legacy.
Yep. And, our family was, dairy was, we talk about meat and dairy at every meal, but our family was dairy at every meal. In the Dutch culture, you have bread and cheese with butter for breakfast.
Wow.
With a glass of milk. You have, cheese and meat sandwiches for lunch. You have pudding. In our Dutch culture, we drink a lot of coffee. I've been drinking coffee since about the age of 6, but we drink it with something that in Dutch, the Dutch word for it is slagroom. So any Dutch listeners might know that word, but you're basically putting whipped cream in your coffee.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yes.
Oh my goodness.
It's very decadent, but dairy was very much all day, every day. Yeah. You had dairy. It was a staple.
Well, I'm really glad that you were drawn to that book in the 80s and that it changed your life, because now we have you, which is
Thank you, Hope. Thank you. And I am, just that awakening. I think when we know, we know. And we are then compelled to find a way to, do what we can. None of us can, change the world overnight, but we can all do something.
Yeah.
So.
Well, let's talk about this chapter. This is kind of where I want to start our discussion. And that is about a chapter that you have written in a newly published book. The book's called The Good It Promises, The Harm It Does: Critical Essays on Effective Altruism. So this is kind of, there's a lot to unpack here, I know. And so I'm hoping we can kind of start broad. And if you could first explain what effective altruism is, and maybe just kind of an overview of the problem that you and others are seeing with effective altruism, EA, also as it's called, as it's used in the animal advocacy movement. So just an overview of the issue.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, Hope, as you've said, it is a very, very big and broad topic. Yeah. So I will do the best I can to try to summarize that for us. Okay. I did have the opportunity to write about this extensively in my doctoral dissertation, but the essence of effective altruism is that it is both a philosophy and it is a practical social movement. So the social movement, of course, being modeled on the philosophy. And this philosophy really on its face seems like a really great thing. So effective altruism is often described as seeking to do the greatest good for the greatest number.
Right.
And again, on its face, Hope, I don't think anybody would disagree with that. Gosh, I want to do the greatest good for the greatest number. Who doesn't?
Right.
So it sounds good, it feels good, and it can seem pretty hard to argue with. I think, though, that when we really dig into the philosophy and when we dig into how that philosophy is operationalized as a social movement, that's when things get really muddy. And it is through this operationalization of this philosophy that we as activists, and for some of you as philanthropists, things become quite dark. And they really are creating an environment where I don't believe that they are doing the most good for certainly the most number or the greatest number of animals. Mm. So effective altruism in our movement, as you said, the acronym EA, sometimes it's also referred to as EAA, or effective animal altruism. Mm-hmm. So you'll see EA and EAA. But in any case, whichever way you want to articulate it, it is built on a foundation of what's called utilitarianism. Some would argue that it's not, but fundamentally, when we look at the in essence, the father of utilitarianism in the animal sector, we think about Peter Singer, the philosopher Peter Singer, who wrote Animal Liberation, 1975. People often call him the father of our movement. And Peter is, in fact, a utilitarian, and he, together with subsequent philosophers, have really operationalized this utilitarian philosophy into effective altruism. And utilitarianism has a number of critical elements. One of those critical elements is what's called consequentialism, which is what my chapter in the book really is a critique of. Another fundamental element is this idea of impartiality, that when we make decisions about our activism, about our philanthropy, that we should do so in an impartial way. And a very interesting example of Peter Singer's commitment to impartiality was treated in the book in one of the chapters that was actually written by Carol Adams. And of particular note, Carol talks about Peter Singer's commitment to impartiality. And she talks about a situation where in 1999, Peter Singer and his sister were dealing with a challenge with their mother, who had Alzheimer's disease. And their mother was in need of caregivers because, of course, of her Alzheimer's disease. And when he was asked about this, he replied, and I'm going to quote from this page of Carol's chapter, and Carol writes, he replied that it was, quote, probably not the best use you could make of my money. And this was Peter talking about his own mother and spending money on her care as a woman suffering from Alzheimer's. So this idea of impartiality. Now, some would argue that utilitarianism is not a fundamental element of effective altruism. Most philosophers and anybody that looks deeply into this would agree that it most certainly is. There are definite differences. An example of a difference is that somebody who subscribes strictly to utilitarianism themselves would also live very frugally and would also give significant components of their personal income to philanthropic endeavors, whereas somebody who lives in accordance with effective altruism does not necessarily need to adopt frugality in terms of their living. But the other fundamental components, again, this idea of consequentialism, impartiality, are significant parts of effective altruism, effective animal altruism, and how decisions are being made for the appropriate expenditure of limited money for the animals. And it's that expenditure of money that has been really taken over in a tremendous way, in a highly monopolistic way by effective altruists.
Yeah. Yeah, and for those that don't know this philosophy around utilitarianism, things like that, if you ever watch Star Trek, if you're a Star Trek fan like I am, I'm kind of a Trekker.
Me too.
Nice. They're constantly exploring the good of the many,
right,
against the good of the one or the few.
right.
And it's interesting because, of course, the Federation's philosophy, or the larger philosophy, is, of course, the good of the many is more important than the good of the one or the few. But then they explore all these moral conundrums where, well, is it? Can we always have that be the overarching ethic? Right. Yeah,
Right. And in my chapter, Hope, I do talk about Spock. And how,
that's right. Spock and Commander Data and
exactly
logic. Yeah,
exactly. And nobody lives like that, and it's simply not a practical application of how we make decisions day to day. Nobody lives like that. I don't think anybody would think that spending, well, maybe not anybody, but I would suggest that most people would not consider my mother. She's in a care facility. She's 90 years old. She has Alzheimer's and a number of other challenges. And our family, we spend considerable amounts of money to ensure the greatest care possible. I don't consider that money a waste of money. My goodness gracious.
Right.
So I think that perhaps the majority of your listeners would agree that caring for our mothers, caring for our loved ones, caring for our family members, I think that's a pretty good expenditure of money, quite frankly.
Yeah, but I think our listeners would also say, but the animals, wait a minute, how we got to help the animals, and there's so few people that care about the animals. So let's talk about that. And you use an example in your chapter of the Esther scanner. Which is this large animal CT scanner that was obtained for Esther the Wonder Pig. Our listeners may be familiar with Esther, the fabulous pig, on social media, and her two dads.
Yep.
So tell us this story, Esther's story, and how it relates to effective altruism.
Yeah, Hope, thank you. I'm very passionate about storytelling.
Yeah.
I use storytelling in my doctoral work. I think it's such a beautiful way that we can share important information. And it's truly how cultures have been sharing information over centuries and centuries, is through story. And I think that, philosophy is wonderful and great, but when we really look at it in a contextual way and we look at individual story, that's when we truly can relate, where we can learn, and when we can really think about what our own belief system is. So I first met Stephen, one of Esther's dads. So Stephen is one of my dearest friends today, but I got a call from him many years ago now. He had heard of me. I was formerly the head of Mercy for Animals in Canada for 6 years. And he had heard of me because he had gone on to social media, and he was in his very early days of veganism. And he had made a comment about loving fireworks. And he got completely vilified on social media for liking fireworks. So he called me out of the blue and basically said, I don't know if you know me. I said, I have heard of you. And he goes, I just got vilified for liking fireworks. What's happening? So I explained to him why vegans, we don't love fireworks. It can be disruptive to wildlife and domestic animals. And he said, oh, I hadn't thought of that. And so that led to me and Stephen becoming very, very close friends. And it further led to him asking me to be the president of the board and the founding president of the board of Happily Ever Esther Farm Sanctuary. So I was the president there for 6 years.
And and I just want to clarify, it's
yeah,
Happily Ever Esther,
Esther.
which is the pig. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Happily Ever
Yes.
Esther Farm Sanctuary. And Esther was our spokespig for the sanctuary. In those early days, Esther was very healthy and vibrant. She was about 700-pound girl. You know, I would visit her all the time and hang out and go for long walks with her and snuggle with her. And she was just a vibrant, fun gal. As time went on, there was an instant in late October, early October 2018, and she had become ill. And it was very serious. She was rushed to the Ontario Veterinary Hospital, which is a very well-known veterinary hospital globally. It's well respected. She was rushed to Guelph, or what we call OVC, Ontario Veterinary Hospital, or Veterinary College rather, OVC. And the challenge was that Esther could not be properly diagnosed because the hospital did not have a CT scanner large enough to fit her 700-pound frame. So we were in quite a conundrum. We were considering other options. We considered sending her to Cornell across the border. But had we done that, it would have required that Esther be quarantined when she returned to Canada, because she was considered a food animal. I met with the CFIA, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. I met with the CFIA. I tried to convince them that she was a domestic animal, like a pet in essence. I don't love that word pet, but for their purposes, I was trying to convince them she was a pet, not a food animal, and they would not budge, as it were. So Stephen, then one night we were chatting and it was late December, and he said, we need to buy a CT scanner. And initially I thought to myself, oh, Stephen, what are you thinking? We're buying a CT scanner? Well, Stephen has an uncanny way of convincing me to do things. He convinced me that this truly was our only option. And it was December 31st that I finally got the paperwork, and I found myself the night before, December 31st, the night before the new year, signing paperwork on behalf of the board, committing to $650,000 US scanner. Because had I not signed it on that December 31st, the next day the price was going up by like 15% or something. I can't remember exactly, but a significant amount of money. So here I am signing away my name to $650,000 US. Fortunately and beautifully and amazingly, we raised that money within 3 months. We had almost 11,000 donors from around the world. Wow. They donated. We raised the money. We bought the scanner. We had it shipped to Guelph, Ontario. It was just an absolutely astounding experience. There was a lot of legwork behind the scenes. It was harder than I'm making it sound, but it got done. And Esther was diagnosed with breast cancer. I am also a breast cancer survivor. Wow. And another thing that she and I had in common, and she underwent treatments and surgery, and her life was saved. When that hit social media in a sort of by saying, gosh, it's been done. Here was the amount of money. It was thanking everybody. There was a ceremony. The father of effective altruism, Peter Singer, did a video on Facebook suggesting that this was a waste of money. Oh. And somebody sent me the video, and I sat on it for a little while and just needed to contemplate. And I came to the conclusion that I couldn't let that comment rest. So I wrote him a letter, and that letter I embedded in that chapter of the book. And I suggested that perhaps he didn't necessarily understand what the value of saving one animal was, and that it wasn't, in fact, just saving one animal. And I itemized 10 very meaningful additional important advocacy techniques and tools that had been accomplished as a result of the scanner. But for effective altruists, the idea of spending $650,000 to buy one piece of equipment to help one animal does not meet one of their tests of consequentialism. So in other words, we didn't know when we bought the scanner what the consequences of buying the scanner would have meant. We went in with some faith, some hope, and some faith. And this is what we do when we love people. This is what we do when we're not sure. We apply hope and we apply faith and we do what we believe to be right. Yeah. And in utilitarianism and in effective altruism, they would never have made that decision. They would have done the math ahead of time and thought, oh my goodness gracious, $650,000 to save a pig makes no sense. Instead, this scanner has not only saved the life of Esther, but it has resulted in literally countless. I would encourage any of your listeners right now to go to Google and type in Esther scanner. The number of mainstream media outlets from literally all over the world. We had articles written in China, literally in Brazil, in Italy, all over the world talking about this. Wow. That you could not quantify how much money it would have cost to get that kind of media.
Right.
The scanner has resulted in being a tool for research for prostate cancer in men. It's also being helped to treat prostate cancer in dogs. And this machine is being used by other large animals in Canada that didn't previously have access to this kind of treatment. So I tell this story with a view to really creating an environment where people can relate to the idea that when we acting rightly in and of itself has huge value, and that we don't always know the consequences. Yeah. And in fact, I've talked about this idea of consequentialism and its flaws many times. In fact, I gave a talk at the Animal Rights National Conference about this. I think it was 2019. This idea that we have to know exactly what the consequences of our actions are going to be in order to decide to engage in those actions. That is such a deeply flawed model. Yeah. Nobody knows. Nobody has a proverbial crystal ball. Nobody knows. And it is something that as activists, we need to be considering the importance of every single life and the importance of ensuring that when we act ethically and we act by maintaining the well-being of the animals that are here and now.
Yeah. And I mean, just listing all of the practical benefits that came from this scanner. But also I see that the perception of so many people coming together for this one pig. For Esther, the perception of that, I think, is immeasurable, absolutely beautiful and uncalculable.
Yes.
That people would see, oh, wow, these people care that much about this pig that they're going to spend this much and put this time in. And yes, this pig has that kind of value to us, an emotional value. We love her. We love this pig.
Yes. Yes.
And we don't want to see her die. Just the perception of that is just incredible.
Right. Yeah. And I couldn't even count the number of dinner table conversations that would have occurred for people that of the 11,000 folks that were generously giving up their money, wow. The number of people that read the articles all over the world and talked about this, and just the value of the dialogue around the importance of all life.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Well, for myself, my connection with EA, I read a couple of books about EA about 10 years ago or so, and I was really drawn in. I mean, I have a very logical brain. I think I have kind of a Spock-like brain.
Okay.
and it made sense to me, right? We need numbers and statistics to make the biggest impact. I was all in. I was like, yeah, this makes so much sense. And at that time, I even advised a fellow activist not to start a farmed animal sanctuary that she was considering starting, explaining the resource intensive nature of sanctuaries and compared to vegan outreach and education and this whole line, right? And she didn't listen to me, luckily, and is doing amazing work with her sanctuary. I mean, incredible work with a kids education program and local media coverage and, impacts in ways that leafleting can never make. And it's, it's unlikely that she would have been the passionate activist she is if she hadn't started that sanctuary and had gone along with what was considered to be cost-effective activism. And I was only in the EA camp for a short time. I wasn't there long because I realized, really analyzing it for myself, that there's just so many advocacy activities that you just can't quantify the outcome and the impact. I mean, there's so many things, the arts, I mean, all kinds of things. There's unique qualities to these activities that have potential to reach people on just a deeper and more profound level than you can quantify, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so, and it's interesting. I think there's a lot of parallels between what happened in the 80s and 90s, when a lot of the vegan rhetoric back then was very logic based.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that, but
I do.
Yeah, there was this poster actually that I remember hanging up at asking natural food stores if we could hang up. And it was this T-Rex dinosaur cartoon or something. And it said, "How to win an argument with a meat eater." And it had all the stats and figures of, water saved and how many animals killed and all that kind of thing. But, as activists, we've evolved our language. We, and I mean, we still see that stats and studies are very important. It's important supporting evidence, of course. But we now know that individual stories of animals' lives, like you were saying, the storytelling is just so critical. Images of animals that evoke emotion, right? I mean, people aren't going to make changes in their lifestyle without an emotional connection or an emotional component. We know this in marketing and advertising, that you need to care about something, you need to value something before you're going to make some kind of decision or change. And we're learning that, that much of our advocacy now is, of course, individual animal stories. Just going with logic, it's not enough. And I see this parallel with EA, where this emotional connection is lost with the philosophy of EA. And you say in your chapter, I'm gonna read a quote here from your chapter. "What EA thinkers continually fail to realize is that emotions are why people stop eating meat, and why people stop going to SeaWorld, and why people stop buying fur coats. Emotions, not numbers. While reason and the rational do enter the decision-making, science and experience both demonstrate that emotions play an integral and vital role, and as such, the animal advocacy movement should draw from both, not trade one for the other." Right. Really, really, really well said. And that was a quote from this new book, "The Good It Promises, the Harm It Does: Critical Essays on Effective Altruism." Can you elaborate on this emotional component?
Yeah, Hope, thank you. And I appreciate your
confession.
Yes, because I also have a confession to make, Hope, and it's so, it's so important that we're open and honest. And I think, even this discussion is an excellent example of storytelling. I mean, there's a reason why podcasts are as popular as they are, because they are opportunities for story. Yeah. And to, again, underscore your confession, I too at one point would have called myself an effective altruist. I do want to be clear about that. It was in the early days when I had left my for-profit world, and I had made a decision to move into animal advocacy on a full-time permanent basis. I was the vice president of Mercy for Animals in Canada. I had led 12 undercover investigations here into factory farms and slaughterhouses. And in my early days of my time at Mercy for Animals, or MFA, as we tend to call it for short, MFA was in the early days not an effective altruist organization. As time progressed, MFA ended up bringing somebody in who was, very vocally EA, and he ended up really changing the culture of MFA, both from an advocacy perspective and just generally from a cultural perspective, employment culture perspective, not for the better. And I, early days, bought in. I bought into the argument that, oh yeah, I guess this does make sense.
Yeah. I
personally engaged in working on cage-free commitments in Canada. I did that. And I look back at those days and I think, yeah, I really initially did sort of drink the proverbial Kool-Aid. And I genuinely believed I was doing really good work for animals. I think as I thought more about it and things started really gnawing at me, like I think similar to you, I started really thinking about this and thinking, this doesn't seem right to me. And it was the obsession with quantification that effective altruists really, really raise up as sort of the pie in the sky. You have to quantify everything. And I realized, no, you don't. And I realized that that's not how I live. And it's not how most people live. And it's not how we make decisions. And it's not how we are connected to the people closest to us through emotion. We are connected to, not only the people closest to us, but maybe our home, maybe the community we live in. Maybe we're connected to, a particular philosophy or a particular religion. We're very deeply connected to these things. And this is how we make decisions. And then when I started doing a lot more research, in particular into the area of cage-free eggs, which effective altruists would argue as the most effective way to spend money on animal advocacy, I came to really genuinely realize how problematic it was. There is significant scientific evidence to even demonstrate that cage-free initiatives are not better for the birds. There are far higher rates of various diseases and higher potential rates of barn fires in cage-free facilities. I've written a couple of blogs about this in detail.
Yeah, I did want to ask you about this because this is it's so concerning to me. And, millions of dollars is being funneled into this issue. It seems to be the direction that so much of the animal advocacy movement is going, is this, transitioning from standard battery cage operations to cage-free operations. And I actually have a quote here from one of your recent blog posts about this. And you say, quote, "Firstly, I have not seen any clear evidence that cage-free facilities provide hens with a better quality of life. Bird welfare can actually be worse in cage-free systems where birds often experience higher rates of broken bones, smothering, high rates of feather picking, and cannibalism." And then I'll add as well that I've seen studies that found higher rates of mortality as well in cage-free operations. And this all connects to the work that I do actually with Compassionate Living's Humane Hoax Project. And I have an anthology coming out that I edited on this issue, on the issue of the humane hoax, exposing the industry's, appeasement of consumers through humane labeling. But this is kind of the other side of that, where the animal advocates are getting on board with this and are very, very involved in creating the cage-free operations. Yeah, I didn't mean to jump in, but
Yeah.
I definitely want to talk about more about this. So tell us more about this.
Yeah, and again, there's so much to say. It's sometimes can feel overwhelming to try to summarize it, but I think that one of the things that I've seen both that tie very directly between effective altruism and cage-free egg work, there's the one element which is the question, is this actually better for animals?
Yeah.
And I'm going to argue that I don't think that it is.
Yeah.
Others may have a different opinion. There are a couple of other elements that I think are really important. My research for my doctoral work, the research that I did, I looked at some of the giving that had been done by large philanthropy organizations. And in particular, one of the largest is OPP, or Open Philanthropy Project. They are an effective altruist organization. And between the months and years of February 2016 and December 2021, OPP had given $176 million to cage-free egg initiatives and other animal welfare work, such as welfare for fishes and welfare for birds that are raised for meat. But the vast majority of that went to cage-free egg work. That is a staggering amount of money. And not only do we not know definitively whether it's better for birds, again, I would argue that it is not. We know that it also isn't better for the environment. It is not better for human health. So if we look at this trifecta of contemplating what is more than just, hey, what's good for animals? We know that the United Nations has come out with sort of what they call the, gosh, I can't think of the name at this moment, but it's that intersection of the importance of both animal welfare, human welfare, and environmental welfare. So cage-free egg work does not in any way make either of those things better. Mm. And not only that, what I think is the most troubling to me is that as I have written about the problems with cage-free egg work from my perspective, it is concerning to me the number of people who have reached out to me personally and called me brave, thanked me, said things like they wish they could have said the same thing. It's this utter silencing that is of the most concern to me when I look at
people feeling they can't speak out against the cage.
Correct.
Happening. Okay.
Correct. Yeah. And it's this idea that we've been doing this cage-free egg work for about, give or take, 10 years, 12 years, somewhere in there. The money is astronomical. All statistics that I have ever found show that meat, dairy, and egg consumption continues to be on the rise on a per capita basis. So something isn't working. Let's be honest about that, right? And not only are we not being honest about what isn't working, but we're also creating an environment where people, mostly women in our movement, so our movement is about 70-ish% women, most of them feel that they can't even talk about the concerns they might have, that there is a silencing of women, preventing them from even being able to enter into good dialogue about questioning whether it's working. And I cite in one of my blogs that I refer to as Effective Altruism, Your Comments and Feedback, I provided many of the comments I received anonymously, of course, but comments like, this has been keeping me up at night. Thank you for saying publicly what many of us are thinking. Thank you for speaking the truth. Somebody else saying, finally, somebody is saying this publicly. Yeah. We've created an environment where we're not even allowed anymore to dialogue, to question.
Well, I agree with you that I really question if cage-free is better. I actually did my own investigating back about 10 years ago or so in Sonoma County, California, where there is lots of alternative egg production, both battery cage and cage-free and free range and everything in between. And I went to these facilities and I actually looked for myself. This is when I was researching for my first book, The Ultimate Betrayal. And I found that the conditions just really varied widely from farm to farm. It wasn't necessarily because of the type of operation. I saw cage-free operations that were much worse, in my opinion, than battery cage operations. It was just situation by situation. But even setting that aside, what's the end goal here? Right. This is the thing that really bothers me about all this. So if the movement is primarily focused on transitioning everything to cage-free, and that's where the money is funneling, right? So we work on that for 10 years, and in 10 years, all egg operations are cage-free. Okay, great. Well, then what? Then we move on probably to gestation crates and pig farming, because that's another area that's starting to gain some traction, getting rid of the gestation crates.
Yep.
So then another 10 years, all pig production or pork production is crate-free. Okay, so now we're 20, 25 years in. Well, then what? We've got debeaking, dehorning, castration. I mean, there's endless cruelties that we tackle one by one for 100 years, right? And after 100 years, we're still confining and killing animals for food.
Exactly.
So, I just don't get what the end goal is. And I think that the animal agriculture industry is thinking, yeah, well, this is great. We can do this dance for as long as you want. And then we get to sell more cage-free and crate-free products, right? I don't think they're unhappy about this so much. They're like, okay, sure, we'll play this game with you, and I just feel like it's this detrimental path. I don't see liberation at the end point. It's incredibly frustrating.
And I agree. It's almost it is truly laughable, because not only that, and I certainly agree with everything you said. And instead of 100 years, I'm going to just say hundreds and hundreds of years, because if we look, we've been working on cage-free eggs actively in this movement, actively for about 12 years, right? Actively. And the number of organizations that have made these commitments under duress, right? A threat of a campaign, we're going to show up at your door, we're going to, a plethora of tactics, right? Not only that, but they're not even following through. I mean, recently, Mercy for Animals put a full-page ad in, was it the New York Times, calling out Kroger for not having followed through on their commitment to cage-free eggs, which I believe is their commitment should be enacted as of next year. And I looked at this ad and I asked myself, number one, how much money did that cost? Right? And number two, all you're doing is advertising the fact that when somebody makes a commitment to you, they can renege on that commitment, and there's no value to this. So all you're doing is advertising the fact that you are incapable of holding organizations to these commitments. I sat at my desk and I have to tell you, I was a little gobsmacked because I thought, this is not a good thing. You're advertising the fact that you are incapable of holding them accountable. Yeah. So you're right. Where does this end? And then I ask questions like, what if that money had been spent on diet change work? Then I ask questions about just other ways that these activists could have spent this amazing amount of time. And I want to be clear that these activists genuinely care. And like me at the time, they thought they were doing the right thing. I did too.
Yeah.
But it's
and many of them are vegan, animal liberation.
Yes.
They absolutely believe the same as we believe, but they've just taken this other path that they are it's sold to them as this is the best thing to do.
Correct. And something else recently that I've noticed, and this has caused me more consternation is that I'm part of a email group of individuals in the movement who keep one another in essence abreast of various happenings. And these are people that are all like me, full-time activists. Ordinarily over the years, this group has been about sharing commitments and sharing information. There was an email that came across 3 days ago where it actually was announcing a job. So this email list also posts jobs in the movement that are available, posted a job for a farm manager and trainer to work at a farm that helps helping them rather transition to cage free. And I thought, we're now at a point where we're advertising this as a job and as a good thing. I had to really take a deep breath on that and thought, what are we doing where we're actually suggesting that people who are animal activists would want to take a job training in production systems in converting from cage to cage free? So it's these things that I'm troubled. I'm deeply troubled.
Yeah. And I absolutely understand wanting to work with farms that are making transitions, but how about focusing on transition to plant farming?
Right.
Not a different form of animal farming.
Right.
I feel like that would be so much more powerful collaborative work where, yes, let's work with farmers. Let's help them to maintain their farming ethos and their livelihoods. All we're asking is just farm plants.
Right.
Oh,
I have the honor of being an advisor and sort of the advisor on the advisory board for the Rancher Advocacy Program. And that's a program that's run out of Texas from, it's an honor. Rowdy Girl. Yeah. Renee King-Sonnen founded that, and I'm on her advisory panel. And, that's exactly what that is.
Yeah.
Hope is, we're transitioning from raising animals to raising plants. And, and then I think, I keep coming back to what you had said, which is, one more incremental welfare advantage, one more. And every time we do that, we're just giving these capitalist industries an opportunity to rebrand themselves as being even better. I was on a flight home recently from San Francisco, and right on the Air Canada menu, it said, have a cage-free egg McMuffin or whatever. Maybe it didn't say McMuffin, but a cage-free egg with, and they're toting this as a, look how great we are. Yeah. So aren't we now telling people that it's okay to eat eggs as long as they're the cage-free ones?
Right.
Then it becomes that food becomes even more inaccessible. And now we're creating an environment where those with resources can buy the cage free, and those without resources, are we asking them to feel worse about themselves because they can't afford it? I mean, it becomes even more insidious as it relates to things like nutrition deserts.
Yeah.
What are we suggesting when the messaging is clear? The messaging is plant-based eating and providing options and opportunities for plant-based food.
You're absolutely right. It's incredibly frustrating to see this, this trajectory, because you're right. We're giving them opportunity to say how wonderful they are. Look, we made these transitions. Look, we've done these wonderful things. Even though the reality for the animals is, if there's any improvement at all, it's minimal. Which, and sometimes there is no improvement. Often there is no improvement. So frustrating that they get the benefit of, touting these humane labels and all of these, marketing and advertising campaigns around this work. And so that takes me into the humane hoax aspect that, that I'm working with. Do you have any thoughts on that, on the humane hoax and, how we're appeasing customers and consumers kind of lulling them into thinking that, there's all these improvements happening and things are getting better.
Right.
So it's okay to buy eggs. It's all right to buy dairy. Look at all the labels. Look how they're trying,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I agree. I see that. I think it's important for all of us to ensure that we are not insular. We can tend to, keep our friend circles vegan, and I know for me, my husband is vegan and also an activist, and most of my friends are vegan, but it's very important for me that I am also spending time with people who are not, because I want to hear their perspective of these things. And I hear the perspective being, oh, Krista, hey, we bought cage-free eggs. Isn't that great? And they're saying it to me as if I should applaud that.
Right, right.
And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
well, okay. How do I respond to that without, making them feel worse about themselves when they're really trying?
Yeah.
That's what we're doing. We're creating an environment where these organizations, these intensive animal agriculture organizations, are finding new and better ways to advertise themselves, and we're giving it to them. And gosh, when I hear that humane hoax, in particular when I see certain organizations offering up stamps, or maybe stamp isn't the right word, but they're offering up seals or a star like approved by,
Yeah.
and it's actually added to the packaging, and I'm in these stores. I have to share with you, my husband, he's so gracious, does 99% of our grocery shopping, because I just dislike grocery shopping in a way that I can't even say. I find it extremely upsetting. And so he is so lovely and so gracious that he does the majority of it, because he knows I don't love going. And it's when I see these kinds of things, I just find it very upsetting.
Yeah.
I want to know. I don't have my head in the proverbial sand about it, but I also don't need to look at it every day. But it's deeply troubling. We're literally empowering these organizations to rebrand themselves in a way where they look better. Yeah. We're giving it to them on a silver platter.
Yep. So frustrating.
I think the bigger issue is that nobody really knows, right? We don't know the future. We don't really know. We can study social justice movements that have gone before, of which I have spent many years doing that. None, of course, are quite the same as ours, because every other social justice movement has been in connection with human beings. Ours, of course, is very different, because animals have voices, but they can't speak English, or they can't speak whatever other language is appropriate in the circumstance in that country or with that activist. So it's harder to discern what they might want. But I still think it is incumbent on us to learn from other movements. And what we know from other movements is that we need a diversified portfolio of work. We know that we need to constantly re-examine what we're doing to see if it indeed is helping animals. We know that we need to pivot when what we're doing doesn't seem to be working. We know that we need some kind of shared model of what change looks like. And these are things we simply don't have in our movement. I've often looked at a really great website. It's called freedomtomarry.org. And they do a beautiful job of really laying out their grand strategy and how they were able to secure the right to marry.
For the LGBTQ.
Right. Yeah. Right. And again, another form of social justice, important, successful social justice work.
Yeah.
And instead, what we're doing is, having one form of activism monopolize our movement, both in terms of money and work, but also by silencing others. And we are not engaging in important dialogue, important critical questioning. We are not doing the things that we need to be doing. We are not collaborating. We are not doing the things that are fundamental. And it is that really causes me, great concern.
Well, just kind of wrapping up this topic, what would you suggest that we should do? I mean, I'm sure I know you don't have all the answers. No one does. Uh, but do you have suggestions, of what direction we should be going? Maybe actions we should be taking?
Yeah, Hope, thank you. And you're right. Nobody has the answers. And anybody who says that they do, I think that's sort of, there's a bit of a red flag for us right
Yeah,
there.
right.
Yes. I think that what we all should be doing is applying a pretty big dose of humility.
Yeah.
And I think we should all be really spending some time trying to understand the history of other social justice movements. I'm a big fan of the work of Bill Moyer. He wrote a wonderful book with others called the MAP model of social movements. And in his book, he talks about 4 different types of activists and how each type are really critical. He has 8 stages of activism. I actually wrote a brief blog that summarized this, and I think that is something that every single activist should be doing. We should be understanding, again, this broader need for different forms of activism. And, I'll share with you where I do see some hope. And that hope really, for me, comes from recognizing that in the last maybe 2 to 3 years, we're finally seeing very large global organizations. So organizations like the World Health Organization, the United Nations, acknowledging the interdependence of health as it relates to the earth, humans, and animals. And I'm seeing this centering of animal issues in the context of the broader health of the world. The United Nations put out a report in July where they listed the sort of 7 anthropogenic factors that were necessary to consider in preventing a next global pandemic. And of those 7 factors, 5 were directly related to intensive animal agriculture.
Wow.
That was really, really great. And I think it allows us as animal activists to really go, yeah, we have a fundamental role here. The World Health Organization has spoken about this trifecta of animals, the earth, and human health. That's being talked about in a really centered way. So we're seeing this happening, and we have an opportunity to really jump up and be center stage, as opposed to perhaps in the past being seen a little bit more fringe. Here we're given a platform to say, hey, that's us. Let us really jump in here. And I think there's some really exciting opportunities that come as a result of that.
Well, Krista, this has just been so amazing and enlightening. I love the work you do, and I want to know more. So I would love to have you on again. But we do need to wrap up. So I love to end with asking, what gives you hope for the future?
There is huge hope for the future, and I think that what I'm seeing now for the first time is more people coming forward. I am seeing voices starting to be raised a little bit more. I'm hoping that the book that we have, which really is the first time that there's been an anthology, a published anthology about the challenges of effective altruism, that is creating some really interesting dialogue. I've seen some tweets. I've seen some dialogue on various forums, and I'm hoping that it really is the catalyst that empowers the value of just asking critical questions. And I really see the need for us to do just that. Let's open dialogue. Let's have open, honest discussions about what is working for animals and what isn't working for animals. And I'm hoping to see that more.
Yeah, so the book is The Good It Promises, The Harm It Does, Critical Essays on Effective Altruism. I'll definitely put a link in the show notes, so everyone should go and check it out. And Krista, it was wonderful having you on. Thank you so, so much.
Hope, thank you for everything you are doing for animals. You are an inspiration. You have been doing this work for many, many years. And may we all just continue to remember why we do what we do and who we are doing it for. Go to your local sanctuary. Go kiss a pig and go hug a chicken. And
Yes.
remember that we do this always for the animals.
Oh, I love that. Absolutely. Thank you for listening to the Hope for the Animals podcast, sponsored by Compassionate Living. I hope you now have a better understanding of this issue, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on EA and the trajectory of the movement. Let me know what you think. I encourage you to get the book, The Good It Promises, The Harm It Does, Critical Essays on Effective Altruism. That is the book that Krista has an essay in. And that book was edited by Carol Adams, Alice Crary, and Lori Groen. I apologize if I mispronounced any of those names. I'm so grateful to these women for editing this book, bringing this issue to light, giving us a forum to talk about it. I'll have a link to that book in the show notes. And I want to say again, Krista and I talked about this a little bit, but I just want to say again, I understand activists that work for these welfare campaigns. I do. I get it. Because you actually can see something happen. You can kind of get some kind of a win, right? When a company goes cage free, or they say that they'll only source eggs from cage free sources, or any of these welfare reforms, it's like a little victory in this very difficult life of being an animal rights activist, this uphill battle of seeing so little change, so much indifference. So I understand that. I really do. I feel like the welfare reform thing, it's kind of like we're giving up in a way. Like, well, there's no way the world's going to go vegan, so let's at least do a little something to make their horrific lives a bit better. But it's so minimal and it's so little. And I don't think that it's going to lead us to our end goal. Diverting our energies and our efforts and our money into welfare reforms, I just don't see it ultimately liberating animals. And of course, I don't know what will work. I don't know what the best strategy is. Like Krista was saying, nobody can really know. We're all just making educated guesses as to what will work. But I have to go with my heart and my gut. And my heart and my gut are telling me that we have to focus on the ultimate goal, which is no animal suffering, no animals exploited, no animals commodified. And I feel that our work and our message and what we do has to reflect that. That's why I focus on vegan education, total animal liberation. But for those that do work in that sector, in the welfare sector, I get it. I understand. You want to help, you want to do something, and it feels like you're doing something. But I would encourage everyone to assess this, to step back and to really look at the big picture of what's going on. And Krista is doing that. There's more people speaking out. This book that is focused on this issue is doing just that. So let's talk about it. Let's assess what's going on. And maybe there's a better path. We will be switching it up next episode and focusing on an animal that we haven't ever specifically talked about on the podcast, and that is rabbits. Bunnies, buns, as I call them. We're going to have a special Easter episode with author Mark Hawthorne, who wrote the book The Way of the Rabbit. So be sure to join us for that in April. And until then, live vegan.